After having an eye surgery, Mrs. Sakura is informed that she would become temporarily blind and that it will take 3 days for her eyes to completely recover. She is happily married to the wealthy surgeon Jack Sakura, so they can afford a maid. Mei is in charge of all household duties and yet finds time to flirt with her police buddy, who has tickets to a performance with a well-known singer. Mei agrees to accompany him, but only if he first does her a favor. She wants him to take Jack's picture to be developed since she forgot to do it and doesn't want to get into problems with her employer. Mrs. Sakura's first day of being blind goes well. Jack makes good use of the circumstance to taunt her relentlessly, and the two of them enjoy themselves. Jack regrettably can't be with his wife as she recovers since he needs to go to Macau for a conference. He forgets to charge his own phone, which is why he dumps it on the sofa, so he takes Mrs. Sakura's with him before leaving. Soon after he departs, Mei requests permission to go as well because she wants to get more asthma medication. She makes a commitment to return soon, however. Mrs. Sakura chooses to sit outdoors and enjoy some fresh air with her dog now that she is all by herself in the home. The pet almost escapes, but Sam, a guy, manages to catch it and attaches it to his doghouse right soon. Sam is in town to see Jack. They apparently attended the same high school, and Jack subsequently did surgery on Sam's wife. Sam is invited by Mrs. Sakura to come in and have a drink, but he only assists her in before deciding to go. Ultimately, Mrs. Sakura sleeps off on the sofa and discovers a storm outside when she wakes up in the evening. Mei hasn't returned yet, which is worrying, but Sam does, ringing the doorbell and explaining that he hasn't been able to obtain a cab due to the rain. Mrs. Sakura welcomes him inside without expressing any skepticism and shares some food and hot tea with him. She also gives him permission to wear some of Jack's clothing. Jack gets on the bed and eats a ripe banana in the privacy of the couple's bedroom, acting like a prince. After that, Sam and Mrs. Sakura had a lengthy conversation while sitting in the living room. Sam reveals that he works at a printing company and speaks lovingly about his wife at first, but soon he loses control and starts raving about how his wife won't let him touch or do of the ink on his nails. He promptly apologizes after realizing what he is doing and makes the decision to depart since the rain has finally ceased. Mrs. Sakura attempts to resume her normal routine, but she can't get rid of the sense that someone is watching her. She chooses to ignore it for the time being and take a shower, but her intuition was correct. Sam is in the home and in the shower with her. He keeps it quiet and lets his hands roam about Mrs. Sakura without touching her in some kind of psychotic game that satisfies him with spooky control. He can't stop himself, however, and he spits some water at her, startling Mrs. Sakura. Sam flees, but when Mrs. Sakura cautiously makes her way downstairs to investigate, Sam reappears, appearing to have come back from the streets, and he puts on an act of beating off the thief and ejecting him from the home. After that, Sam offers Mrs. Sakura a glass of milk with some sleeping pills in it to help her relax before stepping outside while still acting like he's on the watch for the thief. After he leaves, Mrs. Sakura locks the door and attempts to use the phone on the nightstand, but discovers that the cables have been disconnected. The medication starts to work at that point, and she passes out. The next morning, when Mrs. Sakura awakens, Sam is eating at the foot of her bed. He carries her downstairs where breakfast is ready, but Mrs. Sakura refuses to eat until she has called the police. Sam pretends to call the police to humor her, but Mrs. Sakura knows the phone won't work since she tested it last night, and she finally understands Sam has been the real villain the whole time. In an effort to get him to go, she claims that Jack will return shortly, but Sam is aware that he is on vacation since he has been planning it for a year. Additionally, he has Mei in the trunk of his vehicle after taking her hostage. Sam has a meltdown when a mouse bites him, and Mrs. Sakura panics and attempts to flee the home but discovers that every door is locked. Then Sam decides to enjoy Jack's expensive cigarettes as Mrs. Sakura cleans up the messes he just caused. Sam follows her as she walks, teasing her and interrogating her about her innermost wants, wondering whether she has ever desired a man other than Jack. Later, as he forces her down to attempt to engage in sexual activity with her, Mrs. Sakura defends herself by grabbing a fire poker, but Sam quickly snatches it away and bites her neck as a result. A few hours later, Sam prepares lunch and forces Mrs. Sakura to eat even though she is not hungry. After Sam admits he cooked the dog, Mrs. Sakura rapidly becomes ill. Mrs. Sakura must continue eating while sobbing uncontrollably since Sam won't let her go if she doesn't consume it all. After that, Mrs. Sakura runs to the toilet and vomits everything she's eaten as Sam is viewing some family videos. She then attempts to scream for assistance, but no one can hear her, so she breaks down and starts smashing the bathroom's items. After she has calmed down, Sam approaches her in her room and starts talking about his wife once again. He explains that later in their relationship, He discovered she didn't want him to touch her because she was seeing another guy, not because of the ink on his nails. Sam then forces Mrs. Sakura to feed and massage him while he watches television, allowing her some time to come up with a strategy. She begins to act as if she is having an asthma attack and mentions May. But when Sam gets May's bag of medication, he discovers that it is empty since he never allowed her go to the shop. Sam agrees to buy more medication since he doesn't want his victim to pass away just yet, but only after putting Mrs. Sakura in a closet. Fortunately, Mrs. Sakura makes a quick decision and allows a portion of her garment to get trapped in the door, enabling her to unlock it after Sam has left. She first discovers her keys, but Sam has destroyed them all. She then discovers the phone that Jack had left on the sofa, but the battery is dead. Mrs. Sakura starts to weep before realizing there is a charger in her room. So, holding the battery in her hands, she starts to ascend the steps. When Sam returns at that same time, Mrs. Sakura trips and falls due to her worry. There is no time to go to the room now, so she hastily tucks the battery between her knees to keep Sam from learning about her plan. Sam discovers her, and without suspecting anything, brings her to her room, where he forces her to take her medication and get some rest. While he is gone, Mrs. Sakura has time to charge the battery. Later that night, Sam enters the room to confront Mrs. Sakura after learning the medication belongs to May. As a punishment, Sam admits that the guy with whom his wife cheated on him was Jack, her doctor. Sam didn't say anything about the affair for 2 years because he wanted his wife to recover, but she died of a heart attack, indicating that Jack didn't perform his job well. Sam intends to get vengeance on Mrs. Sakura by treating her the same way Jack treated his wife. Mrs. Sakura refuses to accept it. Sam assures Mrs. Sakura that she will know the reality when Jack returns before going outside to smoke. A thief enters the home a short while later, finding Mrs. Sakura in her room. She uses an umbrella to try to protect herself, but the thief quickly overcomes her and binds her to the bed. He doesn't heed her concerns about Sam since he believes she is lying to frighten him away. The thief then makes a few more thefts around the home before entering the room with the intention of having a sexual encounter. She bites him to protect herself, which causes the thief to back away and stumble into Sam. Sam then starts beating the thief up, going so far as to burn him with a cigarette and cruelly squeeze his private. Sam then puts a banana in the thief's mouth to silence him and uses a pair of scissors to severely harm the intruder's legs. Someone rings the doorbell after the thief passes out. It's the officer, who has come to pick May up to go to the performance. Sam poses as Jack and informs the officer that May is not there, which the cop finds strange. After forcing his way inside, the officer asks for a drink and then walks upstairs to look around while Sam is in the kitchen. When he opens the door to the main room, he discovers someone asleep beneath the blankets, but Sam stops him, bringing the drink, claiming Mrs. Sakura is sleeping because she's sick, but in fact the person under the sheets is the unconscious thief. The policeman also discovers a wedding photo, but Sam has replaced Jack's face with his own by using a photo from his wallet. Meanwhile, Mrs. Sakura tries to force open the doors of the closet where Sam had placed her, but her mouth, hands, and feet remain bound, so she can only go slowly downstairs. Sam sends the policeman away while Mrs. Sakura enters the kitchen, uses a tool to break the ropes, and then exits the home by the back door. As her vision gradually begins to return, she can see a hazy light on the road and approach it to request assistance. Mrs. Sakura hears the driver's sharp voice, and when she takes their hand, she sees that it is a woman, which gives her confidence that she is secure. Actually, Sam is doing this by altering his voice and posing as May, and he plainly brings Mrs. Sakura back to the home. Meanwhile, the officer realizes he forgot to drop the photographs in the home, and when he checks them, he realizes the guy he saw wasn't Jack. The policeman hurries back, his rifle drawn, and as he silently searches the home, he discovers Mrs. Sakura in the restroom. He promises to help her in leaving, but Sam seizes the opportunity to sneak up behind him and fatally knife him. Sam then brings Mrs. Sakura to the sofa and has a sexual encounter with her while leaving the police officer's rifle nearby. Mrs. Sakura pretends to be interested in it to divert Sam while she attempts to get to her pistol, but her plan is derailed when Jack unexpectedly comes home. Evidently believing that this is a normal affair, Jack kicks Sam off his wife and pushes him off her before turning to Mrs. Sakura and yelling at her for her betrayal. As a result, Sam has the opportunity to reclaim the weapon and shoot Jack in the leg before forcing him to admit that he became preoccupied with his wife just before she passed away. While Sam beats up Jack, Mrs. Sakura's vision returns. It's still fuzzy, but it enables her to retrieve a fire poker and strike Sam with it. Sadly, this is insufficient to stop him, and Sam just snatches the poker from her before returning to striking Jack. Mrs. Sakura takes advantage of the fact that Sam appears to still be unable to notice that she is beginning to see again by snatching up various items from around the house and hatching a scheme. Mrs. Sakura scatters a number of thumbtacks on the ground, and when Sam walks on them while searching for her, she ambushes him from behind and burns his face with a lighter-attached spray can. Sadly, the spray may rapidly lose its effectiveness, causing Mrs. Sakura to dash to the kitchen to collect replacement equipment. This time, she flicks some powder at Sam's eyes before smacking him with a piece of frozen food. Sam tries to defend himself with the fire poker, but because of his poor vision and inability to locate Mrs. Sakura, he decides to use the burners to compel her to leave. However, Mrs. Sakura jumps on him and stabs him with a pencil before escaping. Her sight finally fully returns as she enters the living room. She pretends to still be blind when she sees Sam coming after her. That way, when Sam approaches her from behind, she can counterattack by smashing a vase on his head. Then, after returning to the kitchen, she quickly loads the microwave with many beer cans and turns it on before hiding behind a door. Sam attempts to follow her, but as he struggles to unlock the door, the microwave explodes, knocking him unconscious. Mrs. Sakura walks out, believing it's finally safe, but Sam is awake and attempts to attack her. Mrs. Sakura picks up the fire poker out of desperation and stabs Sam. When Mrs. Sakura returns, her husband is in the living room pleading for forgiveness. Mrs. Sakura refuses to forgive him since it is his fault that she is now a murderer, but as she approaches him to rage at him, she realizes Sam has been hiding beneath Jack's corpse, pretending to be him. This is Mrs. Sakura's last straw, and she finally snaps. She starts frantically striking Sam with the fire poker until he is permanently dead. A few weeks later, Mrs. Sakura is living in the city and leading an independent life. When a random guy attempts to steal the taxi she has stopped, Mrs. Sakura pulls him away, reminding him that no one should treat women like weaklings to be mistreated. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.